We're going to have a chat now and about the situation facing artists, their personal experiences, and also discussion on how art can be and is being an expression of the protests and alternatives around housing. And we're going to have time for Q&A at the end, so really look forward to audience engagement around that. And I suppose I'm coming to this and delighted that Katrina did this, because it was something that I write about in my book GIAFs, this kind of growing impact of the housing crisis on artists being able to afford to live in Ireland. And what really struck me was one of the biggest kind of hypocrisies and kind of gaps is like this Ireland's, claim, and here we are in the Galway International Arts Festival, this, claim of celebrating and supporting, and we are the country of artists, and that's what, our whole identity, our biggest export, yet they can't afford to live here now. And what does that mean? And then the other side of it that I really want to explore is that how can art express and is expressing both the housing issue, but also alternatives and protests, and different ways that have been done around it. So I'm really looking forward to this. But first, I'm going to go to you, Emmet, first. I had planned to ask you, for what died the sons of Roisin? Was it for this?
Probably not.
Probably not. But seriously, the housing crisis, how is it affecting artists?
Artists, and like anybody who's experiencing a housing shortage, are living in a precarious state. And when you're living in a precarious state, it's incredibly hard to make art. People think that good art comes from adversity, but if you don't have the privilege of a space where you can walk in and close the door to do the deep work and the deep concentration to make art, you're not going to make art. So couple that with the precarity of housing, that you're actually probably going to get thrown out of your house in a while. You're going to have to go look for a house and then do the thing that all artists do, where we almost do a kind of an audition for the person to renting the house, and explaining to them why we don't have paychecks. It's very hard to make art in a world where you don't have a safe place to call your own, or a safe place to put down roots.
Yeah, it's Brigid, would you agree in terms of that? Does the situation, because artists, have different sources of income, obviously, some very precarious, as Emmet mentioned. Does it, that lack of having stability, that place, does it really impact on the ability to make art? And challenge Emmet back maybe a little bit in terms of, does art not come from anywhere, that regardless of where you are, or does it actually really, do you need, as Emmet says, this space?
Well, it's interesting because as you were saying that, I realised that, I'm a painter as well, and when I was in secondary school, I'd paint big murals. That was my thing. I always wanted to paint big, and for the last 20 years or so, my paintings are always really small, and that's because I don't have the space, and also I'm on the move so much that I have to. Before I even start the painting, I'm like, well, I'll have to find somewhere to store this.
Yeah.
So it does affect and in terms of equipment, a lot of people say oh, you're a folk musician, and yes, I am, but I think it's often because I've always just had an acoustic guitar with me, because that's the easiest, simplest, most movable setup for me, because bigger instruments and stuff, if you don't have stable housing, you can't really, have space for bigger equipment. But then also artists, I think, and musicians are the most adaptable people out there, and so there is a side where, as in actually, if I had a lot of space, would I use it? I often write just on my bed anyway, even if I have studio. But is that because it's I'm not expecting to have a stable place because I've never had one since I'm an adult? So yeah, I do think it's affecting how we write and how we create. I know so many of my peers, musicians, they're just living in very strange situations, like maybe cat sitting for 3 months here and there, and this is in Ireland, you know, and then going from another place, and then maybe being like, oh, well, April, May, I'm touring, so I don't need somewhere to live for that time, and then when I'm back, where am I going to go, you know?
Yeah.
And it's, Emmet, I know you wrote something and you want to read it in terms of just that impact, the impact of the crisis, of living it, the real.
Yeah, so my last play, a verse play, spoken word play, was called Accents, and I wrote it with a Cork musician called Talos, or Owen French, and it was about having a baby and a child in a time when your housing is not fixed, and how many of our generation are living a life delayed. I mean, not just artists, but people below the age of 40 don't have kids or only have one child because they can't plan out, and how that's affecting demographics, how that's affecting our lives, how it's affecting the choices that we make. The security of knowing that if you have a child, you're not going to get a letter in the door saying, I'm selling this property. So you take it upon yourself to go, okay, well then, is it, you know, responsible of me to have a child in this situation? Should I? That's an incredible indictment of a country that is making its citizens and wants its citizens to have children because they know the economic utility of children in the future. They need them as workers. Whereas that's the state, how they view many of our citizens. Whereas we don't obviously just see them, you know, the lifeblood of having children is something that we want to do because it can give us meaning, existential meaning. So I wrote a play called Accents, and in it there was a poem, and I thought, you know, maybe it might be nice to hear some poetry, just to kind of break stuff up, as they say. This one's called A Soft Place to Play, and it's about the new house that we moved into while my wife was pregnant, and I was writing a play, and I was all over the place. The gaff we found eventually, an Edwardian cottage. The landlady is proud of this, and the period net curtains, hold, torn. It's a raggedy doll gaff. She was the first one of 30 landlords to take sympathy when their eyes would drift to my love's daily rounding bump. Any kids? The fuck do you think? This property's more for professionals. Former council houses, 3 bedrooms, sans children. They need them for their home gyms. South-facing shafts of delicate morning light settle and press dust on the skin. It falls and adds to the dirt, filling the crevices between the floorboards where they no longer meet. Chipped floors, old paint. I need a soft place to put them down. The lease is only 2 years. It's the 8th rental gaff in 12. I am building my castle on a sand dune again. Scrapping and scraping Allen key as excavation implement, imprinting on my hand and my neck, the tongue and the groove, they no longer kiss. The wood is split, separated from its partner on a trial basis. You see, I should be writing, but I'm doing my best to bring them back together. At least a pound of silt has been taken out of the floor by now. 100 tough years have passed on this hard wood. This does the skin, is dreams. It's the vapour of former tenants. You can't plop a baby down on that. I need somewhere soft for him to play. Diggers is an artist and a mate, and he gives me a dig out. Forget sand and that. Vinyl paint. Paint solves everything, says the painter. An acrylic salve to cover history so my love can play on the floor with him blissfully. I'll place a soft mat, no edges, a fort with toy crenellations from which the man and guide our defence. This is a kiln where we can cook up some hard memories. There'll be a soft place for him to play, a safe space for him to grow. Show the missus I get the gravity of what's upon us, the seriousness of what's in line. I'll do that not with words or platitudes, but digging in the dust with tools. Power tools. Brushing and rolling up on me manly adult responsibilities. I want to slay our fears. Yes, dad joker, harmless, no anger. Spill the ancestors' resonance dust in a circle beyond which no spirits may cross. We will get our own gaff someday. 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 And I'm pulling ghosts out the floor and I spray them with some goof I dust to get rid. I'm a serious man, my power tools in me hand, and I will raise a boy with grit. I will raise a boy with sand. Then again, if he's a soft lad and he's into Star Wars, he'd be like me, and that's all good. I'm just happy if he has 10 fingers and 100 toes, and that's the way it goes, and that's the way it goes, and I just want a place for him to grow. Hi. I hammer a shadow puppet light into the brick. It's a laser-cut fairy tale of aspiration, a little fox sentinel on a hill of broad leaves surrounded by conifer bullies. He keeps watch over the boy outside a tiny cottage, more homely and ideal than the one I stand in. The room is salt lamp lit. It burns through the night. And my prepaid meter, which Clarions weekly to tell us how poorly we're doing. Get batteries for the plastic neon heart that at midnight makes the baby look like he's a hard-boiled detective on his first case in a smoke-free room, scrutinising this strange man suspect fussing with nappies and vests. I'm your dad, maybe so. But where were you last night? I was right here, kid. Like I'll always be. Because it's lit different. I place the last piece, the soft mats, a solar system of soft toys spinning for when he comes into focus, brings the rooms, the toys, our lives into focus. His mother, my love, she gives him the best start, her best smile, the best voice. Yes, I know, and tell me more. She teases me as to how I say, I know, elongating the vowels the way I do for the vect. I have affected this new voice for these early morning years. Diggers was on the money. That paint is doing more than holding things together. Us together. There's no splinters on the skin or gaps to fill in. The dust we've removed and sprayed has kept the spirits out and the love within. And when the lease is up, I'll start the process all over again. Thank you. I was halfway into that and I was like, this poem's long. Better hurry it up. So sorry, I know.
Yeah, no, I'm going to bring in Betsy there now. Just in terms, like listening to, Emmet and Brigid and your own experience as well. In terms of that, how is the housing crisis at a fundamental level impacting on artists in Ireland?
Yeah, I really enjoyed that poem. Thank you so much. And I'm so thankful to be here virtually with you anyway. Thank you. For me, it has profoundly affected my life as an artist and as a mother, as a person, more than anything else that's ever happened to me. I became a writer professionally before I became a single parent, and the reckoning with the risks of a creative life is one thing when you are on your own, but when you have a dependent child, as you were just expressing there, it's a whole other world. It becomes terrifying, And so my son and I became homeless on his first birthday when I became a single parent due to domestic abuse, and we had nowhere to go. We went to Galway, thankfully, and the first sort of support network I had was my fellow sort of single moms and domestic abuse survivors at COPE. And it was really their stories and their experiences that helped me to contextualize my own and helped me to sort of start to de-internalize some of the shame that I felt for not being able to provide for my child. I started to see how this is a really systemic problem, and that was 5 years ago. And I never dreamed of home ownership before I became a single parent, I think partly because I knew it was out of reach, but exactly as the other two panelists have expressed, like the idea that your landlord could tell you have to leave at any time means something really different when you have a baby, and so I started to dream of home ownership, and I knew that a sort of creative approach was the only chance I had at it, because as a single parent, as a writer, an artist, a self-employed person, an immigrant to Ireland, I knew I would never have a chance at a mortgage, you know. And so what I ended up doing is I found a really rundown property in the middle of nowhere that was nonetheless safe enough to live in. It's a really amazing place, I think, the old knitting factory where I'm calling in from now, in Carrow. And I rented it and I worked to crowdfund its purchase over the course of about a year and a half. I wanted to turn it not only into a family home for myself and my kid, but also a retreat space for other single parents, and specifically an art retreat space was what I had in mind, because when I became a single parent, you know, I had already published a few books. I teach creative writing at the University of Galway and elsewhere. I had, you know, a professional reputation, but I was completely unable to avail of even the resources that are available to artists, like residencies and retreats, because of financial constraints and sort of logistical childcare constraints. And so it was that sort of frustration coupled with the seeing other single mothers in the same situation, like I said, through that support group at Cope Galway, the most remarkable women I know, all of whom sort of teeter on the edge of homelessness constantly, you know, and none of whom are any less deserving of homeownership than I am. But I had the sort of community connections to do this crowdfunding that enabled me to buy my home. And it's something I sort of feel a lot of survivor's guilt about. You know, I'm very proud of myself for, you know, I raised 200,000 euros to purchase this house and turned it into a retreat space. But, you know, I talk to my friends who won't even have that chance. And it kills me, because I know that they're just as deserving of stable housing as I am. And I also, you know, I was thinking back on the place I was at where I had that idea. And, you know, I'm writing a memoir about it now. I am speaking about it from a place of safety, but I had to sort of burn myself out in order to even get that small chance at buying a small rundown house in the middle of nowhere in Connemara in Ireland, right? You know, and so that I feel a lot of sort of longing for my younger self not to have had to burn myself out so much just to find some safety, and a lot of anger that other people don't even have that slim chance, you know. And I was thinking about what you said about whether art comes from a place of suffering or from adversity, as you said. And I mean, there's some truth to that, but I think art comes from experience. You know, I know my own writing, I write a lot about trauma, you know, so but it also, like, I have the luxury of being in a place now where I can look at it and write about it. Like, I often think about William Wordsworth saying that poetry is emotion recollected in tranquility. And so you have the emotion, but you also have to have the tranquility. And that's what I want to offer to other single moms and other single parents at the Knitting Factory, because I think a lot about who gets to make art. And that is always been a financial question and a class question, but even more so, I think, now. And also as a consumer of art, I don't just want to read books or listen to songs or watch movies made by people who have the luxury of shutting themselves in a room all day, you know, because even though now that I have stable housing, I still, like, my 6-year-old is in the next room on his tablet right now so that I can do this work, you know, like, I don't have that. There are many luxuries that I don't have, but I think my art, you know, I write books, my books are more fragmented because of the lifestyle I lead, because I'm writing scenes sitting on the edge of the bathtub while my kid takes a bath, or with one hand while I make a peanut butter sandwich. But I don't think that makes my art worse. I actually like that about it. And I want to hear from artists who are in the trenches of life, you know, who aren't just off in a tower writing. And that's why I wanted to create the space at the Knitting Factory, to give some tiny little bit of that tranquility to people so that they can make the art that they need to make, you know. And that's, I think, the same experience that I've heard expressed from the other panelists here.
Yeah, no, it's really an inspiring story, and, you know, that's creating those spaces is so important. There's something you said there that really struck me, and it's this question of shame, and we mentioned it earlier, and I talk a lot about it in my book as well, because when I talk to people, you know, on my podcast and research, who are affected or living the housing crisis, this question of shame really comes up so strongly, and to me, it's so wrong. Like, how, you know, it's a system that has failed you, you know, the system that is failing, this, you know, greed, you know, the failure to build public housing, the failure to treat housing as a human right is the reason why you're in this situation. And added to that, I can't not but think about, Sinead O'Connor, the system that we have, the treatment of single parents. And, you think back to Magdalene Laundries, the highest proportion of people who are homeless amongst families is single parents, lone parent mothers. And you go, the question is, how far have we come as a country when the people made most vulnerable are single mothers with their children? And as you say, a lot of it is related to domestic abuse as well. And you just go, the system is still scapegoating the most vulnerable. Emmet, you want to come in?
And just on that point, in 2014, and this is something that we can actually point to, when decisions are made in government that have a direct effect on the citizens, and there is a direct correlation between the decisions that are made. In 2014, the single parent payment was cut so that a child, once they reached the age of 7, went away. So instantaneously in 2014, they said, and this is something similar with the housing ban, they were going to get all these provisions in place for world-class free childcare, but they didn't.
Yeah.
And it was all about social engineering. It was a Thatcherite social engineering idea, and they expected single parents. 90% of single parents in the country are single mothers, and 10% are males. So it was a gendered decision as well, and they were expecting them to just all of a sudden go out and get work, regardless of whether or not they get their child minded. So they could create an entire generation of latchkey kids. Now, between 20, not that that's a bad thing, but kids left on their own, the time when children get into trouble, and this is proven, is the hours between 3 p.m. in the day and 6 p.m. in the day. So if you know what I mean? So there's so many different things that can happen with a child. And between 2014 and 2019, 1/5 of all single parents fell below the poverty line.
Yeah.
So there is a direct correlation between the choice that is made in government and real world application. And that's when the rot set in many instances. People say, what's happening with our country? There is a decision that was taken in 2014 that has a direct impact on all of those children. And they are now teenagers, some of them are now in their early 20s, and all they've known is poverty.
Yeah.
And that's a side point. But just
it's really important.
And just say one thing about Betsy. It's so enraging that Betsy has to almost expend her life force in order to create, you know what I mean? She spent life force to create this, and she took it on to do.
And it's trauma, as
you know what I mean? You took it on, so you're doing the good work. You know what I mean? And
Brigid, you want?
Yeah, and I mean, you're talking about what I lived.
Right, sorry,
I lived.
yeah.
No apologies. I was living that. I remember that coming in, and being like, oh God. But up to then, anyway, the one-parent family payment was going down and down.
Yeah.
So I haven't explained this, but I'm a single mother. I was a single mother until my son was 5, and then I was in a different relationship, so I wasn't completely on my own. And then now I'm a single mother again. But back then, what was happening was the one-parent family payment was going down, and not by much for some people, but when you're living on every euro, when it goes down at 10 or 20 a week, it's a huge portion, because you'd be paying your rent and you'd get rent allowance, but you'd be paying a top up to the landlord to get them to pretend your rent was low, if you get me, all this stuff. So that happened, and that kept happening every year, just a little bit lower. And then they changed it to when your kid is 7, but then that you have to get a job.
Yeah.
But then the childcare is so horrifically expensive that it didn't make any sense. You were still, and then you lost your rent allowance, or back then anyway.
Yeah.
But it was just it was just a whole trap, the whole thing. But then aside, maybe Betsy, you like living rurally, but I found myself in lots of situations where I had to live rurally and isolated when I didn't want to, because there was no other option to live in a city around people where you have more help, more, options.
I think sorry.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
For me, I think it's always been economically very clear that this is my only option. I knew I could never afford to live in Galway City. And even again, it was a miracle for me to raise the money to buy this house that was under 200 grand, which is like less than most houses are these days. I would love to live in a city. I used to live in New York City. I've always thought of myself as a city person. I also love the beauty of Connemara though, and I do think of it as an advantage that my child's growing up with 2 languages and the Gaeltacht. But it is also, it's it can be hard to fit in here sometimes, and I do miss the sort of diversity of community that happens in a city. But I am I think, I have to hold the thing. I know that we are very lucky to be here, and I think about where we were before, and it is terrifying, and I can hold that at the same time as I can hold my anger and my longing for things to be better. And I think, when I was here on a spousal visa, and then my spouse stopped supporting that with all the emotional abuse and coercive control that was happening, and so I had to sort of frantically apply for a parental visa as the mother of an Irish child, and I was told it took me a long time to even get that visa, and that's as a white American, right? So I can't imagine what people who don't have those privileged identities go through. But even I was then told when I got my parental visa that I had to. The letter I got from the state said that I had to do everything in my power to avoid relying on the state financially. So I never received a one-parent family payment or any kind of financial social support. And so instead, I think I interpreted that as run myself into the ground to support my child. And so I was working up to 9 different remote jobs at one point and still barely making rent, and I think, again, I'm lucky to be in a better place now. I'm also an Irish citizen now, as of last year, but there are, you really do get the message that you should feel ashamed to be in that situation. And also I learned recently that the single parent family tax credit is, it's doubled if you're a widow. So that really got to me, because that seems to me that is the state saying that's a respectable reason to be a single parent.
Punishment or something.
And that I wanted to scream when I saw that, because you are being punished for me. I'm being punished for bringing my child out of a dangerous situation. And then, we were put into a more dangerous and precarious situation because we had to leave a dangerous home. And I know that I'm not alone in that experience. And I think then, right, as an artist, I work from home, I work from my computer, so I can pick my kid up from school every day. And I'm very lucky in that regard as well, but it absolutely affects my ability to work and ability to focus, and also, it kills me to tell my kid I can't play with him because I have to work. I don't even know how many hours a week I work. I teach at the university, I teach online, I write my books, I write articles, and I have very strongly gotten the message that's what I need to do. I need to overwork in order to have any chance at deserving a stable life, and no one should feel that way, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And just bring Brigid back in. Brigid, we talked before on my podcast, and you've talked about it, just in terms of that, and Emmet spoke about it as well, that insecurity. Do you want to tell us, because Emmet spoke about how many times you've had to move?
Yeah,
and the impact of that.
Well, I've counted. So with my son, I've moved. We just moved in February into his 10th house, but I moved 3 times when I was pregnant. So if you count that, it's 13. People used to say to me, "You love to move," and I'd be like, they'd call you so nomadic, and I don't think that counts when you're just moving around Galway.
Yeah.
And if it's not by choice.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like a romantic thing, or something like, oh.
I have to say, I had lovely landlords for the most part. There just needs to be a better social housing, not dependent on, the local people. But I had terrible landlords too. But moved. This is his 10th place, and even so, it's not totally secure. It's not like I don't even have a 1-year lease. I have a sort of lease that just rolls on. I don't even. I don't think my son even thinks that we'll ever have a secure house, and I've had to sort of
Have you spoken to him about it?
Yeah, he's incredible. He's very adaptable. He wants to stay in this place because we went to London for a year. So what was that? 2019. I moved to London for 10 months because I couldn't find anywhere to rent in Galway, and I was living in this holiday home, which was so freezing. Like, you'd sit down on the toilet and scream. It was that cold. Like, do you know those cold? Like, you could see your own breath in the summer cold. So I was like, I've just had enough. And at that point, that was 2019. The rent in London was cheaper than Galway. That's back then. And of course, you could earn a lot more money. So it's not as if the wages were good. But yeah, so there's been a lot of insecurity. I've had to sort of just make peace with that in a sort of almost spiritual way. Like, I've had to zoom out and be like, this is my experience for some reason. Yeah,
it's incredible, that people in Europe, and other European countries just look at us like we're like, what's wrong with you? Like, you can rent, for life, and the landlord sells the property, and they've no right to kick the tenant out. And I was really, it's one of the things that I just, like, the government shifted policy, say, oh, everyone's going to be a renter now, but giving them no security of tenure. And this impact of this insecurity, and particularly on children and families, but also, as Betsy, it is something that, domestic abuse services will talk about, that people are stuck in relationships that are abusive because they don't see somewhere they can go, or they face eviction, and we've even seen over the Examiner report on, the sex for rent, the exploitation, the huge impact on people that's happening that we don't really talk about still. And it goes back to question, Betsy, of shame. Why don't we talk more about these really deep, mental, physical impacts of the housing crisis?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's something that that's one of the few things that maybe we have practical skills with. It's like, for me, being a writer means being practiced in talking about things that I find personal and find shameful. That's sort of how I build my career as an essayist, and I do think that's one of the things that we can offer to people, is sort of a model for being able to come forward and talk about those things, because it is so hard for people to find the words for that, or be able to talk about it. Excuse me. The knitting factory here was first built in 1906 by the Congested Districts Board for Ireland, which was a conservative UK policy to sort of bring social programming to rural Ireland, and in this context also created a lot of the workhouses and mother and baby homes, which are so infamous. And so I say social programs, with 10,000 quotation marks around it. But their sort of thesis statement, which I have written a lot about and find really interesting, was to kill home rule with kindness. So they were looking to provide these sort of like shallow facades of social benefit in order to convince average people that they didn't need home rule. And I know I say this all with an American accent, which like adds a level of irony, but like I think that's something that's great. That's something that I think about a lot on a personal and a political level, is what is this idea of home rule? And it's one of my working titles for the memoir I'm working on, which is a memoir about becoming a single parent and dealing with homelessness and finding a home. Because like, what does it mean to be self-governed and to be independent, and like I never felt that way as a tenant. And I always, even the good landlords I had, I always knew that that there was that we could be gone anytime, and actually the last rental house that I had before the knitting factory, I heard recently that there was a young artist couple and a baby there that were evicted because the landlady decided she'd rather have her child live there. And I felt for them so much, and it really, and I think, but like when I can look at them and see that obviously there's no shame for them to feel, or like I said, for my other single mother friends, but it is so hard like anyone, I mean, I think it's like anything, you can look at someone else and see them with more compassion than you see yourself. But that's why I think it's really important to connect the personal experience with the systemic, with the political, and that idea of what home rule is does that for me so succinctly. Like Ireland has this beautiful history of seizing its independence and you know, its self-governance. But you know, I think, right, it makes me wonder, like other countries, where's that, like, are we getting to a point where people are going to want to take that for themselves again, you know, like where is that sense of home rule for individual families when we feel safe in our homes, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. It brings me on to another area which I wanted to talk about, which was this question of what does the housing crisis mean for us as a people, as a country, or, you know, the Irish psyche, you know, our identity. I'm thinking when you're speaking, Betsy, of James Connolly's famous quote where he said, what's the point in raising the Irish flag over the Dublin castle if the landlords are just replaced with Irish landlords and the British landlords? I think there's a real question about that. Where are we? And are we massively divided between the property owners and the renters, younger generations? Like, how do we tolerate this level of homelessness? Have we become normalized to it? How do we, like I walked up Shop Street yesterday and there's, you know, people sleeping in sleeping bags on the street. And you know, what have we done to ourselves that we can just accept this? Is there no, and then of course you link it back to what we've accepted, tolerated, abuse, everything for you know, there's a contradiction at the heart of the Irish state since independence.
Yeah.
That there's this tolerance, you know, of immigration, of everything. Yet I feel this, with younger generations around repeal, marriage equality, there was a finally just getting rid of that. We're not accepting hypocrisy. We're not accepting tolerating injustice. We want to be as we can be, to be free, to live our lives. Yet here around housing, we're just accepting this horrific trauma been put onto people.
Yeah.
Emmet or Brigid?
No, good.
I mean, it's just such a big, I think a lot of people are living in the effect of it and then find it hard to have the space and time to protest, if you get me. Do you know, like you know, you when you're living in it, you're like, it's hard to think or try and organize something or, but I think, I mean, with Sinead dying, that just affected me so much, but she kind of spoke against all of that, and she was so hated. And like, I grew up in Galway thinking she was I grew up in London till I was 11, and I was like, thought she was a mega star. And then when I moved to Galway, it was like a dirty word almost to say Sinead. Like, that was what it was like in school. And I remember thinking like, oh, you know, but why is that, you know? Like, if you really look at it, it's, well, it makes me think of this, I will link this to housing, but, you know, what's the point in celebrate? Like, yes, celebrate her now, obviously, but she's gone. And it makes me think we're doing the same with housing, like, sort it out now. Don't wait till people are on the street, you know. Don't wait till people are, you know, dying or like have nowhere to go. We should just act now. I think we're really, and me too, I'm really bad at just letting something go on until there's
it's hard. It's hard. Here's the thing, I was on a talk recently and people were saying, what kind of like role can artists take battling the far right? And I said, you know, ultimately, like, why are you looking to an artist who might be in a fragile state to go up against hardened fascists that will knock outside their door and threaten to kill them? But equally, you know, with repeal and those decisions, they were binary decisions that we just had to go to a ballot. Not just, there was decades of work that went into getting them to the point of the ballot box and going in. What happens with housing, it's so labyrinthine and the legislative process is so complex that the simplistic kind of thing, this is what we need to do, eludes people. So I suppose what we need to do as artists and as citizens is to get politically savvy about solutions that have taken place in other countries. But to speak to that point you made about, just to speak to that point you made about, you know, taking part in things. Catu Renters Union, I'm a part of Catu's Renters Union. They are militant and they stop people from getting thrown out of houses. And sometimes they'll send out a message saying, we need bodies. And I'm with the baby and I can't get there. So to take part in the revolution takes time. It takes time out of your day, and that can be hard to organise. But I do think... What's that, Betsy? Sorry?
Oh, sorry, and it takes childcare, I think.
Yeah,
The revolution takes childcare.
You know what I mean? It is. It's so it's like I'd love to get down there and back you up, but I've actually got a kid in my hand right now and I can't. And here's the thing, and it will fall to younger people. They need to start taking over abandoned properties, because I tell you, they'll figure out who owns it quick enough, and they'll come when you and all your mates move in and use it as a house and do it up. All of a sudden, the landlord who's engaging in this antisocial behaviour of leaving the place to become whatever over 30 years and, unchallenged. But also, it's a political thing where we have registrars for doctors and architects and all the professional classes, but the government is terrified of doing something similar for landlords. And we're not talking about registering a tenancy with the RTB. Nobody should be allowed rent a property unless they're a professional. And think about that situation you talked about recently about landlords propositioning people for sex. If a bank manager did that to you, it would be a national scandal. So when it comes to landlords and citizens, there's a kind of, let's just leave it all loose and you guys figure it out yourselves. And the government don't want to get involved. They need to get involved because we need a level of professionalism, because too many of us are engaged in relationships with landlords that we shouldn't be having. They're over familiar, sending you messages, these kind of social arrangements with landlords that I just don't want to have. My bank manager doesn't ring me in the middle of the night on a Wednesday, you know what I mean, drunk, you know the same thing. So, they need to bring about a professionalism to it, but they don't want to do it because they're terrified of scaring them off. But they put us into that situation where they're banking on these individuals to save them. And this is their fault. And that precariousness, legislatively, get rid of being able to throw someone out of a house because their kid is moving in. Get rid of the so-called renovations they're getting done, which 9 times out of 10, they're not getting done. 90% of all rental properties in Fingal, for example, this is just a figure in Sunday Business Post in December of 2022. This is objective because local council's data. 90% of rental properties were below living standard. That means there are people living in places with black mold. There's a recent art project, this is art tackling this, about moisture in places. These are there's broken radiators, broken boilers, broken windows. These are tenement conditions in 2022. And most of the time, people, this kind of idea of a hunger artist, just, sure, look, you'd all be living in a hovel anyway, and sure, you're doing your art, get on with it. So really, what we need to do is not vote for anybody who is not willing to take this crisis by the horns and completely shift it to another way. And they're not willing to do that. So we just need to get rid of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael and Labour because they help. That's
it is clearly we've an election coming up. Do you know what I mean? Next year there's local elections, and the question of change and how will this change. And I have advocated for housing being made a human right, and I think that there's a fundamental change needed in how we see it and values. And I think, and we know art and artists have a central role in expressing kind of cultural change and cultural values. And I've seen, over the last kind of 2 years, there's been this, certain explosion of art expressing this desire and the values and communicating. And when you think of Art of Asbestos, the massive mural down in Cork with the cardboard, head, which has been now expanded and used in protests with lots of people wearing the cardboard head. There's obviously Blind Boy's been doing stuff. You look at, there's a great punk artist, Meryl Streep, is doing really good stuff around housing. There's all sorts of stuff happening that artists, I think, feel really expressing this demand that we see housing completely differently. How important, and also, of course, to mention as well, the Féile Housing, which was a group of artists based in Galway, have done events in Clare as well. And there's lots of other things happening. In terms of that importance and role that art can play, expressing a new values in how we understand housing, how do you see that, maybe Betsy, in terms of kind of artists really? I know, Emmet, you said, it's not artists' role to be kind of political, but isn't it though?
It is our role to be political, just to say that. Often we ask questions and then they'll go, well, what's the answer? And so, I will talk about that. Just to say.
Betsy, yeah.
I mean, I think all art is political. I think, I always tell my students, and I always have a day devoted to this, and I say, like, your politics is your worldview, is your values. You can't make art that doesn't reflect the way you see the world and your values. So, like, you can't remove art from politics. It's not possible. But I agree also that, right, it's the artists are not, like, that's sort of it's like asking individuals to be responsible for climate change when we need to look at systemic policy and corporations. I think we can, as I said, like artists we sort of are train ourselves in being radically vulnerable and in being able to talk about things that maybe other people are too ashamed to talk about or don't have ways to express. I think one of the beautiful things about art is that it can express something that someone else can express something that you feel inside yourself, but have no way to articulate. And, I've had that experience so many times that some other artist has done that for me. And it's a miracle because I can say, look at this is how I feel, and I think, or this is an experience that I've had. And that's one of the sort of highest callings of what art can do. But right, like, I think when you have fascists knocking on your door, as you said, or when you have, you can't ask artists to sort of be the center of that solution. I think that it just doesn't make sense. And also, I think I was just thinking about, right, the revolution needing childcare. I think that's another reason when you have a young child, I know there were protests that I decided not to go to because I am like, as a single parent, as my child's sole carer and provider, putting my body at risk is like, I'm less willing to do that. And I don't like that, but I also, someone needs to, like, where would my toddler go if I wasn't there, and so I think that's another reason also why I think the state likes people to have children even when they can't afford them, because it keeps us docile, it keeps us willing to do whatever we're given, because we'll put up with it for the sake of our children. Right? So I know if I didn't have a child, I'd be a lot more boots on the ground than I am now. And so I think that also leads to the question of do you have to make the choice between being an artist and being a parent, and especially in terms of sorry, I'll speak with but and having a stable life. Like, why is society asking us to make that choice? So,
I'm going to go, just before we go to the audience, Emmet and Brigid, in terms of that question then about art and expressing values and protest.
I was going to read something just really quickly that I wrote about it. This was the Mary Magdalene experience. It was in response to a piece done by Grace Dyes, and it was a number of artists made work based on Mary Magdalene. But I just wrote something that, I think touches on this idea of the arts and the antagonism that happens between artists who do see themselves as political and try to make political change, and artists that don't, and don't see politics as having any space within their work. And that's fine. They can not have to talk about that, but they seem almost offended by it. And it's kind of similar in, I meet a lot of working class, black and white working class spoken word poets who are always like militantly political, because politics affects their lives in a way that it doesn't if you're 60 and have your own house. Their lives are governed and thrown into turmoil constantly by the decisions that are made. So I just really wanted to read something really quickly. There's an establishment bent out of shape by a young artist who didn't know they had to ask for permission. They were under the false idea that art is for everyone. There is a bunch of young artists not asking for permission. There is a person in a gallery questioning why someone would want to exalt working class life and people. Art is about beauty, and there is none here. None. There's a well-meaning woman with pearls in a studio audience discussing the art and the signs in the sky, lecturing the artists on stage that politics has no place in their work. There is an artist explaining how Dali, Maya Angelou, Václav Havel, Sean O'Casey, Nina Simone, Sean Keating, Mary Kelly, the Guerrilla Girls have all been intensely political, to name a few, even the futurists from Italy who used their art to exalt the machinery of death. There's an audience member clutching their necklace saying, that was different. There is an artist stating all artists are contrarians. There is an artist saying this is a protest. There's a well-meaning poet saying you should protest differently. There is a right type of protest. There is an inability to point out what the right type of protest is. There is reality and there is the unreal. There is a physicist telling us all who is to say which is which. Probably her. There's a grandson of a Guinness Cooper in Tala who has inherited a council house built by the state. He has become a landlord and is now renting it back to the council for 2k a month. He wants the tenants to also top this rent up. They can't top it up. He says, why not get another job? They already have 2, so that means now they'll have 3. The landlord himself doesn't have a job. That's unless you think being a landlord is a job. It's not. And you know, so that antagonism that kind of comes between people saying art is about beauty, art is about this. There's a lot of people who want to be artists, like some sort of, you know, poet priest, poet monk, anchorite on the edge of the village that doesn't get involved in the piddling concerns of the local peasants and is just creating art. But they're usually artists who live in incredible amounts of privilege and have incredibly privileged lives and are established artists, while everyone else is just trying to, you know, tear it down from the inside.
And of course, it's also not even just between artists. It's what society, government tells what they fund art, and that's a much bigger question, and what they don't. And
but that's okay. Like, it's okay for the state to fund art and for artists then to, you know, challenge the state. It shows that the state is an incredibly grown. Yeah, but it shows that the state is an incredibly grown-up, mature state. Yeah. Because if you get government funding, it's not government funding; it's our money. It's just being redistributed back to us by the Arts Council, which is independent of government, thankfully. But if you do receive funding and challenge the state, that's fine. Because if you get funding and don't challenge the state, then what's the implication? Yeah. All the state-funded art is what? Propaganda. Yeah. Like The Gathering, 1916, you know, celebration was about basically selling to the world the idea of austerity. Yeah. You know, that's and using co-opting artists to do that.
I hate cutting you off, Emmet.
No.
Unfortunately, we have to.
Sorry,
Brigid, last word.
Oh, yeah, no, I agree with that a lot. Like about the you know, not challenging the state once you have the funding, but there is that kind of psychology is really present in our society here, where it's like. And that's what I've been pushing against. Whereas I wouldn't say I'm like a political, I'm just an artist, you know. And but I've been pushing against that kind of like, you know, boys' club since I started writing and singing. And I've been blacklisted from so many things, and so many promoters and so many things, because I'll say, hey, you know, why are you paying him and why are you not paying me? Hey, why is, you know, and you get punished in a small country like this, because, you know, everybody knows each other, and once you do then get a good break where you might get funding or something, you're very scared to rock the apple cart, because of what you lose out on. But that's the same psychology that's like in the church and in the schools and hospitals and everything.
And housing.
Housing, yeah.
Of course. Okay, unfortunately, I have to, we'll go to the audience now. Looking forward to some questions and engagement. Do we have the roaming mic? Calling all mics. There's someone at the back, actually, save you coming down. Oh, that's where it is. Yeah.
Hi, Joanne Webb. I'm a theatre maker, and I work also in intergenerational trauma. I've had the privilege of being involved in a few chats with Rory already. Also a single parent living in Galway. My head's going to fall off because it's been nodding so much along with this conversation. And thank you so much, all of you, for having such a holistic conversation about housing, because I think those are the conversations we're not yet having. So thank you all so much. I've shared this story before. I was given notice in June last year by my landlord, who's been amazing. I've had 8 privileged years in a house, and I say privileged because he never put my rent up. I have got to the point many times over the last 8 years where I thought I would have to go and get HAP, but he very, was very clear that wasn't something that he was going to engage with. We've been broken into twice. We've loads of mold in the house, but at the same time, I still have felt I'm in this situation all the time of feeling so grateful to him, and I am. And ironically, when the eviction ban was lifted, they came back to me and said, we're not those people, we're not going to put you out in the street. So I am still in my home, the home I've been in for 8 years. But I guess the point that I wanted to make, to follow on lots of what you've said, is around, capitalism is the father of so much. racism, misogyny. There's so much that's caught up in our housing crisis. And I think unless we look at the roots of that and look at the roots of us as a colonised nation and the fact that people are so unable and unwilling to step outside, we've such a vilification of poverty. That I think we continue to look at people who are in unstable housing situations and make it their fault, particularly single mothers. I've had people say to me over the last few years, I've also the sin of having a biracial child. So, I've had people say to me, oh, you would have been in a laundry 40 years ago, quite casually, And I think so, I attempted to see 25 different properties over the last year. I only got to see 3 of them. And that was because 2 of them were friends of friends. Like, even to be able to see a property as a single parent in the arts is impossible. I had people say to me, maybe you shouldn't bring your son, just in case. So, deciding not to bring my 15-year-old boy, in case his colour might affect it. So, I think, I agree with you, Emmet, we need to get militant about this in some ways, but I also think we need to take a female approach, and I think we also really need to be examining, the ancestral parts of this. We need to be looking at why is it that we're still so vilifying people in situations. I mean, I'm a single parent because we fought for 7 years to get a visa for my son's dad because he's black. He didn't get a visa. It was the same time. It was post 2008. I could go on, but I think if we're not actually looking at our own prejudice and our own attachment to our own victimization in this country, we're going to continue to be ruled by capitalism. We've just swapped the English for the church for capitalism. It's going to continue.
Yeah.
And I don't know, like Betty was saying, when you put yourself in a situation as a single parent, as a woman, I've been on many protests and ended up in groups where, you can't keep putting yourself in a situation of danger as an artist by speaking out when there's so much vulnerability. Yeah. And at the same time, if we're not raging, nothing will change. And you've mentioned Sinead today. Oh. Look at how that woman was, driven mad by speaking out and speaking out and speaking out and being vilified for it. So thank you so much. Sorry, I feel like I rambled.
No, brilliant.
These are the conversations we need to keep happening. Thank you.
Thank you so much for speaking yourself again. And I think it is, so important that people do tell those stories, because I think part of it is there's not this questioning and challenging of how is this okay? How is it okay? And it's not right. It's a basic, need of a home, and this idea that, certain groups aren't entitled to that. And how dare you, question, the landlord in terms of mold. But as you've said, it's not just the landlord, the state. As 80,000 households in the private rental sector are getting some support, HAP or RAS, they should be in proper social housing. But the state outsourced it and basically said, we're not going to. And then you have to go and try, as you say, sell yourself and do all these things to find accommodation and made feel that it's your fault. And it's
moralising, essentially, like there's morality comes into all of the legislation, which there shouldn't be.
Yeah.
So single parent payments, you're poor, being poor is a moral failing in their eyes, because they believe in the idea of meritocracy.
Yeah.
So if you haven't worked hard enough, you just haven't pulled yourself up by your bootstraps, denying all of the different privileges that maybe have come to them, so they can feel virtuous.
That convinces them of the legitimacy of their position in
It convinces them, and it makes them feel, allows them to feel virtuous about their position.
Yeah.
So, well, I worked hard for what I got. It's like, yeah, you did, but there is all X and other things can be true.
Sometimes you didn't.
Yeah, no, I know. Yeah, but, well, they worked hard in their own way.
Inherited it.
Yeah, exactly. That's
Not sometimes, a lot of times.
A lot of times.
Yeah.
I was just thinking, really just popped into my head. My mother told me about in their council house in the 60s and 70s, when they tried to up the rates, they went on strike. And then they sold those houses. So literally what the local council did, he goes, you know what? We don't have to deal with this anymore. Yeah. You can become mortgage owners. Yeah. So, if people, and it is something to touch on what Betsy said, if you have free time and you have, time to create, time, space, and not those kind of like insane bills, you can create things. You can also come up with radical ideas. Yeah. But if you're on that feral, like rabbit wheel, whatever you call it, like hamster wheel, like the quickest way to kill a protest, is to make everybody take out a mortgage.
Yeah. You're consumed by it, or be forced to pay rents that you know, are astronomical and face, you know, this constant.
So we're in a
situation
state of
insecurity.
precarity. Because like those, you know, like friends of mine live in Ivy Trust buildings and they say it's a utopia, you know, they pay about 500-600 quid a month or something like that. They've time to be with their kids, they've time to create art, they've time to work. And, you know, if something breaks. And that's housing that has been kept in public, well, by these guys and turned over for 120 years, and it's worked.
It's worked, and that's the point. We actually have it here. We have public housing that is a successful model. It's about expanding it out hugely. Great. Anyone else? Yeah, yourself.
Sorry, I don't think I need this, but as the academic, Rory, has anybody thought about teasing through the legislation of the religious orders owning property and putting a CPO and converting that to artist housing or for single parents? It would be a payback and it would be very healing. And I did a walk from the centre of Tuam to the very famous, for all the wrong reasons, septic tank burial ground. The whole way along that walk, Christian Brothers, Sisters of Mercy, Presentation Order, empty.
Yeah.
And it seems to be the solution, but I've never heard anybody address that. We had to do it for Educate Together Schools to look through who owns what and so on. But
I think just I'm slagging them off earlier, but I do know, to give them credit for this, the Labour Party has tried to do work on this to basically get these schools back and these properties, and they have been pursuing it. And they were kind of voicing the complaints about the new hospital where they've just signed a 300-year lease. The point is, land is the one thing they're not making any more of. And the only power that the church has in this country anymore is how much land they own. And the church is an infinite enterprise. In order for them to fulfill their destiny, they have to be around until the end of days. So 1,000 years to the church is a blip in the grander schemes of what they see as infinite time. So it's nothing to them to give us a 300-year lease because they know they'll be around in 300 years because that's their business.
Yeah.
Their business is to be here when the big fella shows back up. So I'm just like, but this is, and I'm not trying to be facetious by saying this, but that's what they have. They have power, they have control, and they will never give that land up.
I'm saying we should have a documented
Yeah.
census.
Oh, yeah.
That's mapped out the property they own.
Yes.
Then show that it's sitting empty.
Yeah, oh yes, I totally agree. I totally agree.
And look on it as the best process of shame. Highlight it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think you're dead right, and shame them, but I don't think they have any shame.
But I think the point is, though, that there are actual laws that we can use called compulsory purchase order, which can actually take that
But
land.
the state won't use them. I've seen Owen Murphy being challenged on this. He said, what about CPOs? And him saying, that's not the route. CPOs are inherently socialist. It's a communist idea hangover from the early part of the state, and they are terrified of that kind of aspect of our constitution.
Which comes back to the need for the right to housing. And Brigid, you wanted to come in.
Oh, did I?
Oh, you seemed to be interested.
I was nodding.
Betsy, do you want to come in on any of that?
No, I was at that walk into him as well, and I remember thinking the same things. I think, I agree with everything you said. And it's great. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say that the Minister for Housing there was this right to the church asking for what land they had, but it was so interesting that the Minister for Housing had to write to the church to say, what land do you have that might be suitable for residential, rather than, as you say, where the mapping of this land this data, because we actually don't have the data. We don't have it mapped.
It's a really good point.
It is a really good point. It's interesting. I was walking through the northeast inner city there. We live close enough to it the other day, and I was struck by, there's on, I think it's Sean McDermott Street, it is, there's a church there, and it has this massive land around it, and it's just sitting there vacant, and I was going, it's a place where there's antisocial behaviour can happen. You're going, that could be used for so much in terms of the community. And
didn't the Archbishop then kind of excoriate the minister?
Oh, he did.
Well?
Yeah.
He was the hypocrisy of it. He asked him for the land, and he said, "You're not doing enough." And I said, "You do. Literally,
you have all this
switch."
land, exactly. Yeah. And they sold, of course, land to Hine, some of the big investor funds as well.
Did they?
Yeah, on the north. But anyway, north side of the city. Anyone else want to come in before we finish up? I'm conscious, Katrina, we need to finish one more.
We went over.
No? We done?
Yeah.
This lady here.
Oh, sorry, someone over there, yeah.
Hi, please don't let the accent kind of throw you off. I'm very much a Galway girl. I come here, I spend a month every summer, and I get appalled every time I see the same building empty. So I think CPOs are the way to go somewhere or another. 2 Catholic buildings right now are open, are on the market for sale, and they're looking for the highest bidder. You know, like our council should need to step in and say, if you're selling it, we're taking it, and we're taking it at a minimum. We need to start doing something like that. I'm a great believer of grassroots. You know what, there's no reason why Galway City, Galway County cannot be the forefront of changing stuff. And I'm here to ask you, what do we need to do? I dealt with health, I've been dealing with health systems in Galway for the last 3 years with my parents. I even got up at 4 o'clock in the morning to get on a Zoom call to be a volunteer at the patient advocacy. And I was told I was too opinionated to be on a patient advocacy group. But we need to do something, and we need to see something. And if it means, I've done campaigns in the States. My kids, I work in a high school. And we do postcard campaigns all the time, and we get legislators to change their opinions of us because we're doing something different. I don't know whether it means, painting every building, every door red or blue or whatever. That's vacant, just to do something to get noticed. But what can we do to help you? I can give you 4 weeks every summer to do something. but yeah, and I'm part of grassroots Irish people over the States. We want to come home. I tried to come home 12 years ago. Yeah. We could not. The market did not allow me. So now I just spend a month every year. But I do. My kids are here through college too, so they come.
Oh, that's lovely.
Right. Thanks. There's other people. I'm afraid I have to cut it because our time is gone, unfortunately. Last word, very quickly, to each of you. In terms of that, just finishing, what can people do you think, and artists as well, in terms of this, Brigid?
Keep talking, speaking the truth, saying what's happening. I think it's very easy to just kind of keep going on and not actually say, like, I often tell people my story and they're shocked and I'm like, oh, why didn't I say that before? We all have different stories, and trying to meet together and, come up with ideas together. Like, we're all, it's very convenient for the, higher powers or whatever if we're all distracted on our phones and everything. Like, we just need real human action between us. And it's amazing how quick you can come up with solutions actually in real life between each other. That'd be my only idea.
I think it suits people to be on the move, the government, because when people can't stop, they can create a community. And they can stop that kind of atomization that's happening in society where we're all essentially singular kind of entities living separate but side by side. So when you have communities that can forge strong bonds into one place, reach out to your neighbours, reach out to your street, reach out to your town, and reach out, because collectives are the only thing that can change. And they want individuals. They want that individualization of society. So as a group, and one thing legislatively that I would push for in the future is a repeal of the Local Government Act of 2014. They got rid of all town councils in one fell swoop. We are the least represented in all of Europe for local representation. We have the least amount of councillors. And councillors, if you ring them, all they can do is get you a speed bump. They are completely powerless. And they've done that for a very good reason. Is because if you can disempower, it's the world over, disempower local authorities to actually get anything done, then when something doesn't get done, they say, talk to your councillor says, talk to this guy, so they can basically point the fingers at each other. We need to create elected mayors that have responsibility for places like Dublin, Galway, Cork, that have powers of taxation, a huge reordering essentially of our society. And as long as we have Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael and those other establishment parties, that will never, ever, ever happen. So we need to get rid of them. So the best thing, and at this moment in time, really all we can do, you can't actually change a Fine Gaeler's mind, but you can get him out of office. So that's the main thing.
Very good. Betsy, last word to you.
Yeah, thank you. Well, first of all, to echo what Emmet and Brigid said, I think one of the best practices anyone can have is that sort of grassroots work of getting to know your neighbors. I think, I heard someone say recently one of the best artistic practices is loving people. So, your literal neighbors, like, get to know them, look outside of the nuclear family for making these kinds of strong connections that get us through. That's what got me, like I said, the Single Moms Network in Galway is saved my life and my child's life. And I think to think about the role of artists in all of this, I was reminded a few minutes ago of Cesar Cruz's saying saying that art should comfort the disturbed and disturb the comfortable. And I think that sort of hits at that duality that we've been talking about, and that is, you know, the best thing that I would hope any art I would make could do. And so when I'm writing, I'm trying to speak to other single mothers and other people who've been through housing insecurity and that kind of thing. But I also want to challenge, you know, those who are too comfortable, who've created the situation. And I think, as we've been talking about, you know, the landlords are too comfortable in Ireland, the church is too comfortable in Ireland, as Sinead O'Connor said many years ago, and the capitalists are too comfortable in Ireland. And so I think we as artists can start to disturb them, and hopefully those disturbances will ripple outwards.
Amazing.
Absolutely, yeah. I think that to finish, thank you all for being part of this, and I do think that in terms of, you know, finding a way forward, it is that coming together, and there is groups working on that. Emmet mentioned CATU is the tenants union. There's also the Féile Housing. There is different artists collectives who are working around housing. The more it's expressed, the more it's talked about, challenged, questioned, then that's where change comes from, of course, when, you know, it's when we make noise that things change is the reality of it. And there is, I think, you know, we are part of, you know, Ireland is changing massively and, you know, has gone through change. And I really hope that this expression of, which we hopefully will have, a referendum on the right to housing will be part of that, bringing it forward. And the next election, I think, is going to see big change. But it is about us coming together and saying we want a different society and how we do that.
Yeah.
So listen, thank you so much to my panelists, Betsy, Emmet and Brigid. Thank you so much, and to the audience as well.
Thanks.